Hey everybody, welcome in on this video. Today we have Melissa LANTSMAN, political member of parliament for the Conservative Party. She represents Thornhill in Ontario, and she is discussing an incident that happened earlier this week on December 30th at the parliament, actually in the parliament, where there was over 100 people. It was a Jewish group, decided to go in and protest. Now, I know it's 2-3 days ago, and there's a benefit to that because a lot of times when these things happen, it takes a couple of days to figure out what happened, why it happened, who caused it, whose idea it was, and anybody else that was involved. Because it's not a normal thing in Canada or in any Western side of the world to just be able to protest in a government building at any time you want and disrupt. It's just not how it's done. There's a time and place for this kind of stuff. I tried going online a bit. It seems like a lot of people, a lot of news places, the mainstream media, they're not covering this stuff. There's not a lot of video out there either, but I was able to find a couple of sources, and let's take a look. So here I was able to find on Facebook, this is from Kafia. I was also able to find on YouTube, thanks to the Canadian press.
That Israel is raining bombs on Palestinians in their tents, and every jet dropping those bombs has hundreds of Canadian components in it. Canada is still arming Israel, and it's unacceptable, and we're demanding an arms embargo.
Once again, wanted to give thanks to the Canadian press for having that little video clip out there on YouTube so we can watch, and I'll leave the description to their full video. It's a must watch, and now I'm going to pass it back towards Melissa. Let's hear what she's got to say.
The honourable member for Thornhill had a point of privilege. I'm now ready to hear her point of privilege.
I'm rising on that question of privilege that I rose on earlier, and it is about the occupation that took place in the Confederation Building this week. And you probably know, and you may have heard by now, Madam Speaker, that a group of 100 protesters in an orchestrated and coordinated fashion entered the Confederation Building and undertook an occupation of that building. And while these events occurred on Tuesday, it is in the subsequent days that additional details have come to light, which I would respectfully submit as a means to my question of privilege, and that it satisfies the timeliness requirement. According to the news reports published on CBC's website even on Tuesday morning, quote, the demonstration started around 8:45 a.m. and the protesters said that they would allow MPs with offices in the building to pass through the crowd, but those MPs would have to listen to demonstrators' demands on the way in. Officers of the Parliamentary Protection Service and the Ottawa Police were on the scene asking people if they had any business inside the building before letting them in. And by 10 a.m., the protesters were removed from the building where they were chanting outside. The police and the PPS members intercepted and then released 14 protesters without charges. End quote. However, in the subsequent days, Madam Speaker, additional news reports featuring additional comments and confessions by the protesters' organizers came to light. On Wednesday, Politico published a piece with an interview with a protest organizer named Rachel Small, whose goal was, quote, it was to interrupt the daily business of Parliament by not letting MPs walk through these marble hallways, end quote. The Globe and Mail.
Having a hard time hearing the member. I'm going to ask the Sergeant at Arms to go and check what's going on.
Okay, so now here, I think this is bullshit, what's happening now. It's like excuses just to interrupt.
On in the hall to see if they can quiet that down. I also want to just
this is just
that,
bullshit.
When we go through points of privilege, questions of privilege, the role of the chairs to decide the matter merits priority over all other business, which I have done, except for depending on what the House is used to. But also, we need to make sure that that it's a brief summary of what has transpired, and so that I can determine whether or not we need to move on, and whether or not others have want to provide other information to this. I also just want to check. I see there is a raised hand. I'm not sure if it's a question of privilege. If it's on the question of privilege or a point of order. So the honour member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Madam Speaker, it's just to have the floor once the member for Thornhill is done on this point of privilege.
Perfect. So the honourable member for Thornhill. Sorry, another point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I just want to go back to the point you just made, that a point of privilege is supposed to be something that's of substantive. The issue here is whether or not it's being used to filibuster and interrupt
Order.
other members. Now, we know the person heckling me who wants women to go to backstreet abortionists, she can take her turn. The issue here is the interruption of the work of the House of Commons by the false use of a point
So
of privilege.
again, I just want to remind members to please be respectful. I just want to ask the honourable member if she can get to indicate the point of order that the point of privilege, the question of privilege she has brought forward, in order to make sure that I have a full understanding of it. But again, as briefly as it should be a brief summary and not take hours to speak about. I have another point of order. Sorry, the honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The comment that was just made by the member for the NDP, I would like to have him apologize and withdraw that comment, Madam Speaker. It was totally out of line, totally unacceptable comment to be made in this House.
Yeah, I just asked the honourable member to withdraw the comment.
I withdraw, but they voted against it. Right.
I would just ask members to please be respectful and not add more to what they had to say. I had to do this yesterday as well. I would also ask the honourable from St. Albert Edmonton. Again, he thinks that I'm not hearing what he's saying, and I certainly do hear what he says, and so it's very problematic. And so what the issue that I raised was because when I first started the point of privilege was I should have read a document to speak about the question of privilege and how people bring those forward. And so I forgot to do that. So I just wanted to bring it forward at that point just to indicate that it is a brief summary of what has transpired. The honourable member, knowing that it's a short day, the honourable member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I've spoken for just a couple of moments to give you context, and I will not be silenced by that member about the personal safety of members of this House and his toxic masculinity in here. The thing that he accuses others of doing. But Madam Speaker, I'm going to continue on this context because it's important. And it is not only my privilege that is breached, but it is everybody that has an office in the Confederation Building and those who tried to access the parliamentary precinct. And I have lots of examples of where this has been heard in this House and in committee. But on Wednesday evening, I understand it, also the Western Standard published an insightful piece on the protest. And this is where that member should be ashamed of himself. The organization the protest was supported. The organization who protested was supported. The support was provided by New Democrats. Shameful. The article opens as follows. Quote, a group of approximately 130 Jewish Canadians took over Parliament Hill's Confederation Building Tuesday morning in support of Palestine, demanding an arms embargo on Israel. 3 New Democrats, the member for Edmonton Strathcona, the member for Hamilton Centre, the member for Winnipeg Centre, joined the 100 protesters occupying the lobby of that building, where members of Parliament have offices, where about 30 of them stayed outside. The article quotes later a lady named Mrs. Small. 3 MPs came down, said Small, naming 3 NDP MPs. The member for Winnipeg Centre said that she was so proud to be there. And I'm not trying to speak on her behalf, but I was very touched by that, end quote. Madam Speaker, these subsequent interviews and these things that we've read in the news later that came to light later since the events of Tuesday morning, which I will submit also formed the basis of a breach of privilege and equally from the basis of the timeliness necessary in bringing this point of privilege forward. Right. My own parliamentary offices are in that building. In fact, they're the first door on the right when you walk in that building. And it was an effort to paralyze the workings of Parliament. Exactly. And it was essentially directed at anybody in that building. And it's hard to think that it wasn't directed at members right here or right there on the first floor. Exactly. With the protesters' true motivations only coming to light, not to mention that they were seemingly aided by new Democrat MPs. Shameful. And that's what's compelled me to rise on this question of privilege. Our own members, the members of this House of Commons, impeding the work of parliamentarians to get into their office, to have meetings in their office, to have meetings canceled in their office, to have those who come to the front door not be able to even walk through the front door of Parliament Hill. That's why I'm raising this member. The House of Commons procedure in practice states that on page 107, quote, in order to fulfill their parliamentary duties, members should be able to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed. And speakers have consequently upheld that right of the House to the services of its members, free from intimidation and obstruction and interference. End quote. The parliamentary privilege in Canada, the second edition, meanwhile, comments that on page 176, quote, no impediment should be placed on a member in going about his or her parliamentary business, whether in the House, on the way to the House, or on the way home. Indeed, Madam Speaker, Boscan-Gagnon, at page 86, remind us that, quote, the denial of access of members to the parliamentary precinct has been found to constitute contempt of the House on several occasions, end quote. It might be helpful to pause here, Madam Speaker, and recall the definition of the parliamentary precinct, which this very much falls within. It is the offices of members of Parliament. Quote, on page 163 of Mango, the parliamentary precinct is endorsed by, quote, in the parliamentary sense, the precincts are the premises of the House of Commons, the Senate, occupy from time to time.
So the question is what are we going to do about this? Something should be done about this, or it's just going to keep on happening.
Exercises physical control to enable the members to perform their parliamentary work without obstruction or interference, end quote. That includes the Confederation Building, where access was denied or meant to be denied on Tuesday morning, and then with subsequent media reports coming out after about who was involved in those protests. And it is the intention here of the NDP organized protesters, which was revealed in those media interviews, which is critical because on page 60 in Boscan-Gagnon, it explains that, quote, any conduct which offends the authority or the dignity of the House, even though no breach of any specific privilege may have been committed, it is referred to as a contempt of the House. Exactly. Contempt may be an act of omission, and it does not have to actually obstruct and impede the House or a member. It merely has to have the tendency to produce such results, end quote. And I find that, I find that piece very important, Madam Speaker. They put 100 people in the building at an entryway, and I can guarantee you that they did that because they had the intention to obstruct the free passage of anyone looking to get in, members of Parliament or those they were conducting business with. And turning back to the prohibition on obstructing and impeding members of Parliament on the Hill, Boscan-Gagnon expand on this principle on page 110. Quote, in the circumstances where members claim to be physically obstructed, impeded, or interfered with, or intimidated in the performance of their parliamentary functions, the Speaker is apt to find that a prima facie breach of privilege has occurred. Incidents involving the obstruction, such as traffic barriers, security cordons, a union picket line, either impede members' access to the parliamentary precinct or blocking their free movement within the precinct, as well as occurrences of physical assault, have been found to be a prima facie cases of privilege, end quote. That's on page 110. And from there, 2 further pages of the book are dedicated to summarizing the prima facie cases of privilege, which speakers have found over the past 4 decades related to members' access being fettered by protests, strikes, inflexible security arrangements. And given that those clear-cut facts of each case are an equally clear principle, speakers' rulings on questions of privilege of this nature have typically been prompt and concise. The several reports of the Standing Committee on the Procedure and House Affairs, or from Procedure and House Affairs, which often followed, are richer in content and help us understand the issue at hand. And I would believe that it would be useful to review briefly some of those principles. In reporting to the House on two questions of privilege arising from the federal public service strike, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee explained at paragraph 15 in its 66th report presented in April of 1999, quote, "One of the privileges of members of the House of Commons is a right to unimpeded access to Parliament and the parliamentary precincts. Exactly. And members are entitled to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed and cannot be prevented from entering the chamber or a committee room of a parliamentary proceeding. This privilege can be traced back to at least the early 18th century. And this is part of the heritage of all legislative bodies that trace their origins back to the British parliamentary tradition. It is based on the preeminent right of the House to the attendance and service of its members, and any obstruction of members constitutes a breach of privilege and a contempt of the House of Commons," end quote. In the same committee, following a different question of privilege, it is said in the 21st report presented in the House in December of 2004, quote, "The denial of access to members of the House, even if temporary, is unacceptable, and it constitutes contempt of the House. Right. Members must not be impeded or interfered with while on the way to the chamber or when going about their parliamentary business. To preempt this, it would interfere with the operation of the House of Commons and undermine the preeminent right of the House to service of its members," end quote. The report, Madam Speaker, was concurred in the House on May 17th, 2005. The Procedure and House Affairs Committee later wrote, this time in the 26th report in May of 2012, quote, "As a part of parliamentary privilege, members of the House of Commons have the right to unimpeded and unfettered access to the parliamentary precincts and are entitled to go about their parliamentary duties and functions undisturbed without any form of interference." Right. Parliament Hill, and most notably Centre Block and the Peace Tower, represent for Canadians the physical embodiment of our parliamentary democracy, and as such, the grounds of Parliament Hill have become the preferred site of individuals and groups for peaceful gatherings and manifestations. The Canadian values and culture, as embodied notably in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, encourage rather than deter such exercise of fundamental rights of expression and association. And the symbolism of Parliament Hill has, however, made it potential target for those with malicious and illegal intentions, and to the security posture on Parliament Hill, therefore must be adjusted to meet those threats, end quote. You will recall, Madam Speaker, that the Globe and Mail's comment about Madam Wasser that I quoted earlier, who, quote, said in an interview that the Confederation Building was chosen for the protest because it is a building where many parliamentarians conduct their business, and protesters wanted to bring that usual business on Parliament Hill to a halt. Okay. And going back to that 2012 report of the committee, it restated the obligations and expectations of access to Parliament Hill, including the observation, quote, "First, members of the House of Commons should not, in any case, be denied or delayed access to the Hill or the precinct." That is exactly what happened on Tuesday morning, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I just want to remind the member she is repeating a lot of what she has already said, and I just want to remind the member that we expect members to be brief in bringing new information to the matter at hand, or to discussing the matter at hand, and when they're starting to get repetitive, then I'm going to have heard enough, and I want to allow others to who have risen on this here, but I do want to just indicate that Speaker Scheer in April 30th, 2012, and also Acting Speaker Devlin, June 13th, 2012. I can also quote Assisting Deputy Speaker Anthony Rhoda, all who have indicated that the Speaker has a right to terminate that discussion, and that it does not mean that any member rising on the question of privilege has unlimited time on the floor. I just want to remind the member to please be brief with anything else that she wishes to add. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I'm talking about a serious issue where the security of members and the breach of privilege of members of this House would have occurred. And I've brought you multiple examples from multiple different reports and different rulings and different reports within the Procedure and House committees. And I'm stating those in order to provide you with the maximum context for you to be able to rule on this question of privilege. A question of privilege that impeded members of this House, your own colleagues, Madam Speaker, from doing their work, entering their offices, having meetings, and potentially having their safety breached in this place. And I would expect that members of this House would take that seriously, because if this is not a question of privilege, I'm not sure what is. Exactly. But similar points have also been made, and sometimes word for word, by this committee. And I'll state another report, the 34th report. It was presented in March of 2015. Another one in the 34th report, this time presented in 2017. In responses to the 2015 question of privilege, where concerns were raised about a 74-second delay for a shuttle bus, truly rose to a case of a prima facie breach of privilege. So if a delayed bus was found to be a breach of privilege, then I'm not sure how 130 people sitting in the lobby impeding access to members of Parliament, members of this House, to enter this place, do their work, enter their offices, and feel safe. I'm not sure why you wouldn't be able to hear that as a question of privilege in its entirety.
No.
So there you have it. What do you guys think of this video? Let me know in the comments below.